it's slightly derivative, but much like with Hush, it's less so about the overall mystery, even though the holiday mystery is central to this, and it doesn't quite stick the landing, but it's more about the visuals, whether it be with Tim Sale's great art or Jim Lee's in Hush, and also the journey that Batman goes on and all of his rogues gallery and how they interplay with his life. And the dominant theme in this is the waning out of respectable, air quotes, organized crime, the veneer of the old mobster aesthetic, for the new costumed criminals that seem to have followed in the wake of Batman, and Batman's futile attempt to wage a short-term crusade on organized crime, then bringing in a lifelong crusade against costumed criminals instead.
Yes, it is the passing of the torch, so to speak, of the once respectable criminal face of Gotham, that being the Maroni family, the Falcone family, whatever other families that might have existed in the city before then, to the freakish costumed face of the Batman's Rogue Gallery, brought in partially by Falcone himself through involving them in his schemes and plots, and his own son, spoiler alert for the identity of Holiday, or one of the potential identities of Holiday, being his son, turning also into a freakish killer with a gimmick of his own, that being Holiday murders like Calendar Man, but actually, to be fair, there's not that much to differentiate there.
Well, just Alberto Falcone seems to be far more competent than Julian Day.
Yeah,
because Julian Day is given the aesthetics of Hannibal Lecter, but he's hardly as intelligent.
Yeah, so Falcone, in his attempt to maintain the power of the city in his own hands and away from the costume freaks, ends up accidentally ushering in a new era of costume freaks, including his own son.
There seems to be a weird lesson here, looking at Gotham City, for what the oligarchs are trying to do with anarcho-tyranny in current Democrat cities in America.
You could certainly make an argument for that.
I would certainly warn the Silicon Valley technocrats and long-instantiated Democrat politicians against making a voter base and a revolutionary constituency out of all the spiteful mutants that currently exist, drug-addicted or pink-haired on their streets, because eventually they may come and consume you too if you aren't well fortified.
Yes, creating a permanent activist class may be useful, especially for winning elections in the short term, but on a long-term scale, unless you know that you have, say, a competent police force to be able to control them, after a while things will just grow out of control and become pure chaos. I mean, I was just talking with John this morning before you came in, and he was showing me clips from London of some of the absolute terrible policing that's going on in there, in some places where you can see that they've just hired a load of minorities and tiny women who can't actually stand up to any of the criminals.
I've seen this video this morning, yes.
Yes, it's one that's been going around recently. And if you have that class of people out on the streets causing chaos, and your own policies have caused your police force to become incredibly weak, you may not be able to keep control of it anymore. Yeah. And I think you are right that this comic is quite prescient in that way. It's a bit of a warning, you could say, because it's all about the metamorphosis as well. Batman being the person who is trying to hold back the flood, so to speak, but he is only one man.
Yeah, he's a reactionary force to that deeply embedded police corruption, and then a counter-reactionary force enabled by that corruption's attempt to still cling on to their power, which are the costume criminals, then come in and escalate the conflicts to a level where normal people can't deal with it. And so Batman becomes a permanent fixture of hope and justice within Gotham, but it also feels like he's on the arc of a long defeat, much like Harvey Dent, and that means that he has to act outside the institution, whereas Dent, trying to act within the institution, gets degraded, corrupted, and co-opted into the criminal element side eventually. And they do a really good job of conjoining those arcs.
Things like when you can just explain the narrative themes like this in such a way, and it is so easy to do with so many Batman comics, it makes it all the more cringeworthy that they have him teaming up with Antifa homeless queers in some of the more recent ones, because it's so out of touch with the very theming of his character in the first place. Because you are right, he's the reactionary force fighting against the forces of entropy, but he's through the very fact that the entropy has already set in, he could be argued as being a symptom of that entropy himself. He's basically doomed to fail over and over and over again. And I recently read or listened to the audiobook of Oswald Spengler's Man in Technics,
right.
And there is quite a poignant passage at the end of that, which has become rather famous and is shared among dissident right circles. Primarily, they clip out the one sentence that's kind of a meme sentence, the optimism is cowardice. But essentially what he's talking about in that last passage, in fact, let me get it up for you, because it is a wonderfully written passage, which is kind of out of character for Spengler, because a lot of the time his prose can be a bit dry and characterless, but this one's actually quite nice. Here we go. It's, faced as we are with this destiny, there is only one world outlook that is worthy of us, that which has already been mentioned as the choice of Achilles. Better a short life full of deeds and glory than a long life without content. Already the danger is so great for every individual, every class, every people, that to cherish any illusion whatever is deplorable. Time does not suffer itself to be halted. There is no question of prudent retreat or wise renunciation. Only dreamers believe that there is a way out. Optimism is cowardice. We are born into this time and must bravely follow the path to the destined end. There is no other way. Our duty is to hold on to the lost position without hope, without rescue, like that Roman soldier whose bones were found in the front of a door in Pompeii, who, during the eruption of Vesuvius, died at his post because they forgot to relieve him. That is greatness. That is what it means to be a thoroughbred. The honourable end is the one thing that cannot be taken from a man.
That sounds like the understanding that difficult to accept truths, like the deconstruction of your society, are not an excuse to give into fatalism and retreat, but rather a call to action in the existential war to perform your duty and try and reform something, even if all the forces are going against you. And that's actually a very strong and rousing message.
It really is. You know, people take the optimism is cowardice out of context and just use it as its own little statement. But in the context of that statement, you are right. And I think Batman, you know, ironic as it is to go from Spengler to, you know, what some would describe as Capes, is actually an excellent portrayal of that spirit, the West, the European spirit, as Spengler himself probably would have described it as being.
I do want to just
Faustian spirit.
Put a small injunction there with people that will dismiss comics as let's just say cape shit. You know, I don't like that, because it is reductive to the point of where it dismisses, and I think Morrison was onto something here, not in that it replaces long instantiated traditional Christianity, but that superhero comics are part of a cultural dialectic of where we're continually trying to uncover values in how we should act in certain crisis-based circumstances. And so, if you just throw baby out with the bathwater because modern comics are terrible and comics as a medium can cater to children, you also throw out things like this, which have deep and rousing themes that we've immediately extracted just from reading it, and they're much more existential than they just are entertainment. And so I do want to say, it's not worth disregarding the entire medium just because some of it is bad. Some of it is really good. Like this
yes,
stuff.
Absolutely. You can't dismiss an entire medium just because the most public-facing portion of it at this moment in time has unfortunately become a conveyor belt. That's what most people are referring to when they talk about, when they use the term cape shit, is they're talking about the Marvel conveyor belt, which even so can still occasionally pump out something that's halfway decent, but I completely understand why most people are tired of it. Most people are tired of that format of films. Most people are tired of how that way of structuring a film universe has been co-opted by every other film studio in the West, and they're all pumping out and trying to create their own version of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I completely understand why everybody is tired of that, because honestly, I am tired of that. I don't want that, but once again, you within the medium that originated that structure, you can find really wonderful stories.
So, off of the interconnectedness of that, I just wanted to talk briefly how this takes place within Batman's first few years and gives us a framework of understanding chronology. And this leaps off of, speaking of Morrison as well, the idea that comics continuity is a very postmodern entity and you can never get a concrete continuity. Marvel tries to do a linear continuity, but it doesn't really match up with actual time, because otherwise Peter Parker would have been 16 for 50 years. And I had a debate once on Twitter with the guy that runs Bleeding Cool, and I forget his name, but he is insufferable because he
what is Bleeding Cool? Is it
Bleeding Cool is the very left-wing comic book website. It's one of the Access Media outlets.
All right.
Rick Johnson, I think his name is. And he was tweeting, this was a few years ago now, about Lois Lane issue 1, which was a Greg Rucka comic where Lois Lane yells at Sarah Huckabee Sanders about the border and the Trump administration. And so I said, this is out of character for Lois Lane.
I'm sorry, that's annoying just because I know I've read some Greg Rucka stuff and he's written some very good stuff in the past. It's always very disappointing for me to hear that excellent writers have been infected with the mind virus.
Well, he wrote some great Batman stuff in the early 2000s, but current year catches up with many people. Don't worship your heroes. And I was saying this is out of character for Lois Lane because she would likely subordinate her journalistic integrity to being some performative camera puppet. And I was saying, okay, well, you can map that also, this wouldn't necessarily line up to this. The DC Universe's chronology is probably about 10 or so years behind ours. And Rick was trying to say there is no such thing as a coherent chronological comics continuity. Now, considering you founded your career off that seems to be self-defeating. But
yes,
and that is an innately, I think, postmodern position.
Is this where your crusade to find the perfect DC continuity originates? Well, he has a ridiculous document.
Yeah, it's got about 3,000 footnotes. So I think that Frank Miller, of all people, even though Frank's had some kind of base tendencies over the course of his life, not recently because he put Trump in Dark Knight 4, but whatever, and Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale give us pinpoint dates to start Batman's career. And so I've roughly chalked it up to the year of about 1975, but we've got the actual dates, days, and times that they go through. And this is following on from year 1, this is a trend that gives us a block of time to know what Batman's done. So he starts in January in year 1, and then it goes in between some of the issues of year 1, a hell of a lot happens. So after the first issue of year 1, you can probably slot in the flashbacks with Andrea Beaumont from Mask of the Phantasm.
Oh, okay.
So that now...
Oh, we're including the animated series continuity in parts of this as well.
Well, we can include parts of it because certain episodes kind of have to be in continuity, particularly because of how Dark Victory includes Mr. Freeze. You can either go with Legends of the Dark Knight Snow, which is an inferior story, even though J.H. Williams wrote it, or everyone's just going to go with Heart of Ice from the animated series.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one.
So that works in later on.
I think also it's just good to throw props at the animated series from the early 90s because that is an excellent show. Yeah,
if we're going to go by Batman aesthetics, I'd say Loeb and Sale, Jim Lee, and the animated series are probably the top 3. And sleeper pick, the Batman 2004 with No Shoes, Wild Hair, Joker.
I was going to say with Dreadlock Joker. That's a controversial one, but
I think he's great.
I remember really enjoying that as a child, but I've not watched it since.
Freddy Krueger was the Riddler, so
that's pretty cool.
That was another good iteration. I mean,
I'll also say I really do like the aesthetics of the Batman, Arkham Asylum, and Arkham City. Although then when it gets to Arkham Knight, which is a fantastic game that is really underrated as far as I'm concerned,
Batmobile sucks.
I disagree. I actually think that when it's used well. There's just a few too many bat tank sequences where you have to fight up against lots of drones, which do get tiring, but the rest of the game I think is fantastic. But I dislike the way it changed the aesthetic from the other two, because the other two did have the cartoonish proportions, whereas Batman's face in that one just looks kind of weird.
Yeah, Arkham City is still one of my favourites. So goes Batman year 1, some of Mask of the Phantasm, Shaman intersperses within scenes of year 1. You get to see him do his first suit up, he goes abroad. And there's also a story from the back of the Batman Chronicles, I think it's 18, where you see Batman have to drop a date to go and do his first outing in the April of year 1. So there's this is going to be an incomplete timeline, by the way, because it's almost impossible to get every issue down, but I'm still working on it.
And I'm going to just assume, just offhand, we're not going to include that Kevin Smith comic that retconned one of the coolest moments of year 1.
Right. So I actually, other than that dialogue box, which is terrible, I quite liked Widening Gyre because of the revival of the Silver St. Cloud relationship, because I think she's a good character. But it's inexcusable for those who don't know. Kevin Smith retconned that Batman pissed himself in the cool scene where he emerges from the smoke at Commissioner Loeb's house and Mayor Gill's house. And he said that he basically pissed his pants because one of the smoke grenades went off in his utility belt. Can we not debase our heroes, please?
I know that you're a comedy writer, Kevin, but you didn't need to make that a joke. You didn't need to go back and jokeify one of the coolest moments and iconic moments of the comic books.
Yeah, and then early into the career as well, and it has to take place at this point because there's a dialogue box that says 3 weeks into my mission, is a Legends of the Dark Knight story called Clay, which is where they introduced the Matt Hagen version of Clayface. So Clayface has to be one of the earliest villains that Batman fights, and he has to fight Matt Hagen Clayface well before he meets the Basil Karlo Clayface later on.
I quite like that, just because Clayface to me always seems... He feels like a very classic golden era. It's golden
Silver
era.
So the mutable Clayface was Silver Age. The original Clayface was Golden Age, but the original Clayface didn't have any powers. He just had a scary mask and he stabbed people. And then in Mudpack, he took Matt Hagen's powers and transformed him into Ultra Clayface, and now he's part of the Bat family.
That's fair. I think his concept though just feels very Gold Age to me. Just a failing actor ends up in an accident, ends up with these powers that he can't really control, but learns to control and then uses them for crime.
Okay, so what you've done here is you've Mandela affected the Batman the Animated Series version, because the original version is Basil Karlo, who's just an actor who goes around stabbing people, and his horror character is Clayface, but he can't change shape. But Matt Hagen is a diver who goes and finds a pool of magical clay and uses it to commit crimes. In Batman the Animated Series, they combine the two characters, of where Matt Hagen was an actor who was working for the mob, and they used the experimental putty and turned him into a tragic figure.
This isn't selling me on the you can create a continuity, honestly.
Well, you just can't include the Batman the Animated Series episode in that one.
Well,
there we go.
This is why when Grant Morrison decided that with his Batman run he was going to make it all make sense, there are parts of that you definitely have to be on acid to understand.
Okay, I have to agree with that. How do you think I've compiled this? A lot of booze. So then after year one, other than the final panel, because the final panel reveals the Joker comes into town, there's a slight time jump in there. So you get Catwoman, her sister's keeper, Batman and the Monster Men, the Killing Joke flashbacks with Red Hood falling into the acid, Blink, which is a story by Dwayne McDuffie about a blind man who can see through other people's eyes, and he ends up finding out Batman's identity, and then the Mad Monk, and then you get the Man Who Laughs, which we've mentioned before in episode 2.
Excellent comic.
And then finally, at the end of year 1, you get Batman and Superman meeting for the first time in Superman the Man of Steel issue 3. So that is the pretty much concrete Batman year 1, which then jumps straight into the Long Halloween years, which kicks off with Batman Tenses, then Gothic, which is Grant Morrison's first outing, Prey, which is the second appearance of Hugo Strange, Don't Blink, Venom, which he encounters Venom for the first time, possibly Going Sane, because that's really difficult to fit in, because that takes about 6 months, and then kicks off with The Long Halloween's Wedding, which takes place in the June, July, August, and September period of the first year, and ends with the first holiday killing.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.